Hi, so today's recording is about how to replace spreadsheets using Calcapp, and specifically the weight and balance problem that we have in aviation. So I will talk a little bit about how we went from a paper form like this to an Excel spreadsheet, and then how we moved on to a calculator application. And what this application does is that it calculates the weight and balance of things. So in order to explain that, I have this illustration of an airplane. And whichever airplane you have, whether it's a commercial airliner or whether it is a small general aviation aircraft like this one, we have a weight and balance problem. So we don't want to overload the plane, and we don't want to put all of the weights in the wrong location. So because if we have a plane that is overweight or is unbalanced, that's a terrible plane to fly, and we might actually crash it. So what all pilots do is that you typically imagine that you have a lever or a scale of some sort, and then you place out all of the weights that you know that you will have. So the green big one over here is actually the engine, and then we know whether or not we will have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 passengers, and if we'll be carrying any baggage in the back. And then we'll perform calculations to figure out how much force is applied to the aircraft in the different positions, and whether that total weight and the total force, which we call the moment, is within the tolerances or bounds of what the plane was manufactured for. And if it's in, then we're good. If it's not, then we don't fly, or we unload something. So typically we would fill out a form that looks like this, and you can see all of the weights that I mentioned before, and then we calculate the moment, which is actually just the distance from that center point times the weight to calculate the force. And that's a bit tricky. We use small diagrams like this where we figure out we're looking at the rear passengers. They weigh in total 300 pounds. Well, that is about 22 pounds of force, and so on. And so you need to fill out all of these values and then sum them up. What you're interested in are these two, the total weight and the total moment. And this is then just cross-checked with this diagram. So we had 2,300 pounds and about 103 pound-inches of moment at this location. So we'll just cross-check those two, make sure that we're inside of this big box here, and if we are, then we're good to go. And as you can see here, we are at maximum takeoff weight. We can't be out above this box because then we'll be too heavy, but we are within the sort of balancing point of the aircraft in this intersection here. So first, let's start by opening up the Excel sheet. And you can see it's fairly straightforward. The locations in the airplane in this column, the weight that we place there, the force that is exerted by this weight at that location, and then we have the totals down here. And this diagram here is just for reference. So our strategy is based on 3 different steps, or has 3 different steps. The first step is to identify all of the inputs, and this is quite easy in this spreadsheet. We have a total of 7 input fields. It's these orange ones here, where you punch in number of gallons, the weights of the different people, and how much baggage you have in the 2 baggage areas. The second step of the strategy is to identify all of your outputs, and in this case it's these 2 gray boxes over here. It's the total weight and the total moment. So both step 1 and step 2 are fairly straightforward. The third step is the tricky one, and that is how to reach these outputs, so how to calculate these outputs based on the inputs. But we've walked through how to do that with you just as soon as we have created the input and the output fields. So let's move on into Calcapp Creator. So I will open up my Chrome browser. I have already typed in creator.calcapp.net, and I'm here in the Manage Application screen. So I'll make sure I'm on the New Application tab up here, and I'll click blank, and then I'll fill in the name of my application, which I'll just call Weight and Balance. Click Create. So now I'm in the actual editor, and we'll just move on and create a calculation panel. This is what we need in order to create all of our fields and add our formulas. So the first step would be to give this calculation panel a name. I'll select Weight and Balance, and then the strategy for the inputs will be to group them. So if we take a closer look at the Excel sheet, we actually have one group, so to speak, of fuel. We have one group representing the passengers and pilot in the front, one for the rear passengers, and one for the baggage areas. That seems to make sense. So let's create these groups. So first group will be fuel, and we'll have one field in that group which would be amount, and we'll punch in gallons here. So I'll use a dash just to show that there's no value and the unit gallons. So that completes the fuel. We'll move on to the front seat, and we'll add two fields, one for the pilot and one for passenger number one. So I'll type pilot here, pounds, and then passenger number one in pounds. I'll add the second or third group here for the rear seats. Add two fields for passenger 2 and 3, passenger 2 pounds and passenger 3 pounds, and then we have the baggage group. So I'll just create that group here, baggage, and add two fields. So we call those area 1 pounds and area 2 in pounds. So the great thing about Calcapp is that you can just preview your work. So I'll just press the preview button. It's a little cramped here, but we see that now we have these groups. This is what it will look like on the phone later. We have amount, you can punch in some values, you can punch in values in area. And that's it. Now we have our input fields. So let's move on to the output fields. Now, the outputs are just as easy to create as the inputs. I'll just create a new group, which I call totals, and I'll add one field for the weight, which is in pounds, and that corresponds to this gray field here, the 2019, and we'll create one for the moment, this 80.3. So let's add the field name moment, and this has a little weird unit. It's actually pounds times inches, pound inches. I'll just punch in LBSIN as the unit here, and that's done. Okay, great. Now we have the outputs as well, and we can preview them. We'll see that we have them here, and right now we can punch in values in all of these here, and nothing special will happen. But we can see that the unit appears as they're supposed to in both the input fields and our output fields at this point in time. Great. So now comes the tricky part, and that's how to make sure that our outputs actually are calculated based on our inputs. So let's move on to that step. If we take a look at the total weight, I'll press F2 here, we can see that it actually contains one formula, which is the sum of all of these fields here. And if we backtrack and we look, there's no formula here, no formula here. Here is a formula that's simply the addition of these two. The same thing for these two. And this one is a little more, or a little odd. It's 6 times the gallon. So if you want to calculate the weight of a gallon of fuel, it's actually 6 pounds per gallon. So that's why that looks like that. And for the other two, they're simply constant values that have been put in. So let's start by updating this cell in Calcapp. So I'll just click weight. I'll go to the formula section and I'll enter this. So we said 1366 plus 15, constant value. and then we had the calculation, and we said 6 times the amount of fuel. And so whenever you create a field here, it will receive that name. So if I click amount here, you'll see it's called amount. And so when I go back here, I can just use that name here as the cell value instead of A1 or B2. Next, we'll sum up the pilot and passenger 1, same idea. And then for the rear passengers, it's passenger 2 and passenger 3. And then finally, we have the baggage area 1 and baggage area 2. I just add the brackets so that it's easier to read. I'll punch enter. There are no errors indicated, so let's see if it works. I'll press the preview button. And we have, let's use the same values here. So we punch in 38. Oops, 38. We have the pilot weight, which we said was 200. Passenger 1 was 200. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And so we have a total down here of 2,009 pounds. Let's see, and 2,009 pounds here. Let's try modifying it. We'll add a lightweight in the rear seat of 100 pounds. 100 pounds here. That works as well. So fairly confident that works. So now we sorted out one of the output fields. Let's move on to the moment total here. And this one is a little more complicated. If we press F2 in Excel here, we see that that is actually the sum of those fields. And if we look at these, they will actually all follow the same pattern. And if you take a look, it's actually the weight times the arm. That's the distance from that center point, if you remember. And then we divide that by 1,000, so we get a manageable number to present to the user. And that's what all of these look like. The only real exception here is that there's no calculation needed for 1 and 2 because, well, there is no input field. So we can actually just cheat and we can use these two constant values for those for 1 and 2. So let's get working on that. I'll start by closing the preview. I will select the moment field, and then we said we would reuse these values, so 53.8 minus 0.2, and then we will add up this value here. So it was the weight times the arm divided by 1,000. So plus, and I'll use a few brackets here to ease the reading, we have the weight, and the weight was amount times 6, and then times the arm, which was 47.8, sorry, times 47.8, and then divide that by 1,000. A little complicated, you need to stay focused here, but the idea is fairly straightforward. So we do the same thing with the people in the front seat. So that would be pilot plus passenger 1 times the arm, which in this case is 37 inches. And then we'll divide all of that by 1,000. And then we'll do the rear seat, passenger 2 plus passenger 3 times the arm that is applicable for them, and that is 73 inches. So they're located approximately 73 inches from the plane's natural balance point. Divide that by 1,000, and then we have the baggage area 1 times the arm for that one, which is 95, divide by 1,000. Then we have area 2 times 123, divide that by 1,000. Press enter. Nothing's read. That's fantastic. So let's try it out. We'll start the preview. Punch in the same numbers as we have in the Excel sheet. So 38 gallons. Pilot is 200 pounds. Passenger 1 is 200 pounds. We have a rear passenger of 100 pounds. And so we should have here a total of 2,109. We have a total here of 2,109, and then we should have a moment of 86.6. and 86.6 is in the moment here. So that works out. So let's try just adding some baggage in the rear of the plane. So that's 10 plus 15 pounds. Let's add 10 here and 15 here. So this is 89.4. This says 89.39. So I've used some rounding in Excel, but we're within tolerances, and the total weight is 2,134. So this seems to be working perfectly. That's great. The final thing I would like to show is just how to share this application. So let's close the preview. I'll click the Share App button, and what happens here is that you get a link. So I'll copy that link, and I will open up a new Firefox web browser. Here we have it, and I'll punch that in to the address bar, and you can see that this application loads nicely here. And if I just resize this to the approximate size of a phone, there's actually a way of doing that in Firefox. We won't do that right now. You can see this is what it will look like on your phone. So we can punch in the amounts, 200, 200, 100, and then 10 and 15, and we get the same values. It's really nimble. So that shows you how to work with Calcapp and how to share the application.